Welcome. My name is Fouad Abd-El-Khalick. I'm Dean of the School of Education at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. We're here today to talk about early literacy and the need to improve our ability and our capacity to help young readers and struggling readers to read better. Our conversation was prompted by a report from the Business Roundtable, an association of chief executive officers from across the United States. The report, which is titled "Why Reading Matters and What to Do About It," describes some concerning gaps in early reading performance and includes a wide-ranging list of policy recommendations aimed at improving early reading. With me today are two distinguished guests who have been very active in this area. Susan Gates, Special Advisor on Education Initiatives at SAS Institute in Cary, North Carolina. Susan was involved in helping put together the Business Roundtable report, which we're discussing today. And Lynne Vernon-Feagans is the William Friday Distinguished Professor of Early Childhood Intervention and Literacy at Carolina's School of Education. Lynne has devoted much of her career and research toward helping and developing improved teaching methods for struggling readers across the state. I wanted to bring them together to talk about our needs in early reading proficiency and what we can do about it. I wanted for us to talk about the areas where we need to focus our efforts, as well as what does the research tell us about how we can improve that work. So Susan, we'll start with you. Welcome. Can you please describe for us briefly what the Business Roundtable report found regarding the need for improvement in early literacy?
The Business Roundtable was concerned about the skills gap that is being experienced by companies across the United States and here in North Carolina as well, including at SAS, where I work. And they realized that third grade reading proficiency is a milestone in children's education continuum, and that if you don't achieve third grade reading proficiency, you have children who are 4 times more likely not to graduate from high school. You also have children who then are not going into post-secondary training and education, and children who will struggle to develop soft skills like critical thinking and communications, which are vital in the business community today and will continue to be necessary as we look down the road. So the Business Roundtable put together a task force who was spearheaded by our CEO, Dr. Jim Goodnight, to better understand third grade reading proficiency, its impact on our economy, and then to determine how can you make sure more children are reading proficient. Here in North Carolina, 62% of 4th graders, based on the latest data, are not reading proficiently. So the BRT, which is the acronym for the Business Roundtable, came up with 6 policy recommendations that states can put into place to strengthen and increase third grade reading proficiency. If you'd like for me to review what those are, those 6, the first one is to expand access to high-quality pre-kindergarten. The second one is to make sure that kids then transition into high-quality full-day kindergarten. The next is that throughout the time that children are in our education system, and frankly even stretching down to our youngest children, make sure that there are assessments and data systems to track how well students are doing as they move toward third grade. And then require systematic interventions so that parents and teachers can keep children on track. There also then needs to be a governance system that is aligned and coordinated so that children can move seamlessly through the system all the way up through third grade. And then finally, what we're here to talk about more today, to equip both teachers and principals with the skills and knowledge that they need to make sure that children are reading proficiently at the end of third grade.
That's an interesting segue for people who are in schools of education. Lynne, when you think about pre-service teachers or practicing teachers in the classrooms, what does the research show us on how we can better prepare teachers to both teach reading as well as help struggling readers in that area?
Yeah, well, I want to say the Business Roundtable report is really excellent, and you know, you have really looked at the research, which is not always the case on these reports. So it's definitely true that in the United States and in North Carolina, we're not doing a good enough job in helping all of our children learn to read by third grade. teaching reading is not easy, and I think the general public sometimes underestimates the complexity of teaching children how to read, especially children who don't get it right away. And so I've spent a long time trying to think about this, and we, I think, have developed some principles and an intervention that really works. So teachers often come out of undergraduate institutions, including ours, with skills to teach kids who will easily learn to read no matter what curriculum. But there are many children who really need direct instruction in reading, and teachers are not always prepared to do that. So I think we could do a better job at our universities in helping our undergraduates be better teachers of reading, and there are a variety of ways to do that. We have time. A lot of it is just having more classes in methods, but the other that we've learned is that this is true of adult learners, probably of children too, is that teachers actually learn by doing. And so we have learned through research that teachers who go to workshops, or even teachers in classrooms who just listen to lectures, that's not how they learn. They learn by working with children and seeing what works. And in our program, because we work a lot with low wealth schools where we have 70 to 80% of the children that are reading below grade level, we use webcam technology to Skype or FaceTime into the classroom and watch the teacher as she's instructing reading and give her real-time feedback. And so our literacy coaches, which we know, and in your report you state this, coaching we know really works, but it's very expensive for schools, and especially in North Carolina, which isn't the wealthiest state in the union. It really is it was a challenge to think of how you can coach teachers, but through webcam technology, which is free. We Skype with teachers in Nebraska and Texas and New Mexico, and we've shown that you can really make a difference in early reading with kids when teachers, classroom teachers, are really prepared to teach reading.
I want to unpack a couple of things you said for people watching us. So you mentioned teachers who are in pre-service training still at the university. You mentioned teachers who are in the field. And you brought this notion of coaching or mentoring teachers as they are working in the classrooms. And that's really important because one-shot professional development workshops or a little bit of lecturing at teachers is not going to get us there. But at the same time, you talked about the expense and the difficulty of coaching teachers, especially in rural areas or teachers who are already out there in the classroom. So I know, first of all, I want to get your reaction, Susan, to some of these comments regarding the need to work with teachers in STU or in their classrooms.
Well, I think you need to do both, and what the Business Roundtable report discusses is trying to enhance the skill set while these are pre-service students, so that they truly develop the skills for teaching early reading and, frankly, teaching early math, which is related to third grade reading proficiency, and early science, and hone in on that. And then another piece that is concerning to the Business Roundtable and to us here in North Carolina is making sure that principals understand early childhood development, making sure that they understand how literacy skills are developed so that they can then manage, for lack of a better term, an elementary school where this work is going on. And there also needs to be perhaps looking at licensure and certification to encompass those early years. Here in North Carolina, we have a birth to kindergarten license and then a kindergarten to 5th grade. And the BRT report talks about that it really needs to span at least pre-K into those early elementary grades. It gives the principals flexibility, but at the same time, you can then include coursework on early literacy instruction.
That's excellent. I do want to go back to what I know is something you worked with for years and years and years. It's called the targeted reading intervention. And you talked about Skyping or using webcam technology to visit with teachers in their classrooms from a distance, which enables you to work across a whole state in rural areas and other classrooms. Can you give us a better sense of what this reading teacher intervention looks like, and what does your research shows about its effectiveness?
Yeah, well, I guess I would say we have been working with teachers who are already out in the field, but I agree with you that we have to do a better job at the pre-service level, and that's including here at UNC and all of our universities around the country, not just in North Carolina. But I do think we have not used technology like we should have. So for instance, at the pre-service level, what I would love in our School of Education is that we'd use these webcams to actually do some of the student teaching. So instead of having me go out and watch a student teacher, it's much more efficient, right, for me to use webcam technology to do this. The other is, and we talked a little bit about this before we started, is that one of the advantages of being in North Carolina is we do progress monitoring in the classroom. And what our intervention does is it takes that progress monitoring information, which means that teachers, classroom teachers, are assessing their children in reading over the course of the year. They have to do it 3 times for all children, but for the children that are struggling, they do it much more often. But what teachers struggle with is, what do I do with this information that will improve my instruction? And that's what our program does. It links those assessments with information that the teacher can use to help individual struggling readers in their classroom. So our program does the Big 5, which is all of the aspects of reading that are important. And the teacher works with an individual child for 15 minutes a day. A lot of people say, well, she doesn't have time to do that, right? But what we're trying to do is to get the teacher to change the way she thinks about reading instruction. And we have evidence from our research that the children in the classroom who've been targeted, the targeted reading intervention, to improve, actually make huge gains in reading. But every child in that classroom also gains compared to in these randomized control trials that we have now been doing for 12 years. And we have a new one that we're starting. We're now in Sampson County right now, and we have an NC Quest grant to be in Bertie, and we were in the Charlotte schools last year. So we're hoping that the kind of intervention that we've developed, it can make a difference for teachers. And I really think this is the way in which we can begin to start to help all of our children, but especially those struggling readers.
So targeted reading intervention could do 2 things. Could take university expertise into classrooms to help practicing teachers or in-service teachers, but also bringing the real classrooms to our and other institutions to bring the classrooms into the training of pre-service teachers. So that's a very, very interesting model to move forward. But both of you have talked about assessment. And so, Susan, I want to go back to one of the recommendations of the Business Roundtable, which is the need for better assessments. Can you please talk a little bit about or unpack this idea and tell us what needs to be done in that area?
Well, I think first you need to think about assessments broadly. And it's not just taking kids' tests. You're talking about very young children here. So what needs to be assessed and understood? Here in North Carolina, we're looking at the children from birth through age 8, which is the end of 3rd grade, and figuring out along that continuum what needs to be understood. There's a fantastic initiative underway in North Carolina called the NC Pathways to Grade Level Reading. And that is an initiative of over 100 stakeholders, including many experts such as Lynne, to determine indicators that need to be identified, assessed, and the data captured around those, beginning with everything from low birth weight babies, then to looking at what skills do children have as they enter kindergarten. There's a lot of work in North Carolina. In fact, North Carolina is spearheading it on kindergarten entry assessments, so that kindergarten teachers, when that child enters their doors, has a better understanding of where the child is, both not only in literacy but in all subjects. And then assessments that Lynne can speak to much better than I, as the child progresses toward 3rd grade, how is that child progressing toward literacy skills and other skills necessary to attain by the end of 3rd grade?
So the most important thing I hear you also saying, this is not about testing. No. Assessment is really to sort of get a diagnostic sense of where students are, how they're moving towards interventions. Lynne, can you tell us a little bit about how you use assessment, and how can data and formative assessments and diagnostic assessments help teachers as they work with struggling readers to lift their performance?
Yeah, okay, good. Well, I guess without getting into real details, there are generally two areas that many children struggle with in learning how to read. The first is what we call kind of letter-sound correspondence, and a lot of children have a lot of trouble understanding how that symbol, like, for instance, I always say, the letter C never makes that sound, right? So learning the alphabet isn't exactly that doesn't always really help kids. But they have to know that that C it stands for the K sound, right? And a lot of children have a lot of trouble with that, especially when it's in the context of a word, knowing what those different sounds are. And that's called decoding. And so the assessments in M class try and get at that in a way so that the teacher would understand, oh, this child is either very good at this or not very good at this. The other area where children have problems is in reading comprehension, which is related to their understanding of vocabulary, connected discourse, being able to summarize a story, those kinds of skills. And so children can have deficits in both of these areas or one of them. And what's important is to make sure that the assessments in the school tap those. Right now, I think we have pretty good assessments, but just, Susan, as you said, these are very young children. And so assessing a child in kindergarten or even in pre-K, it's very difficult. They're not used to being tested. And so we have to, I think we're doing a pretty good job. I really think that North Carolina is ahead of many states in doing these assessments. But again, I think the problem is that the assessments are not linked to the instruction that the teacher needs to use. And that's when we've done our focus groups, that's what we've found out is they say, oh yes, we're using these M-class scores, but we don't know how those are linked to the reading curriculum that we're using in our classrooms.
And M-class is a battery of assessments for reading.
Yes, that's right.
What's of high interest to us at the School of Education is trying to take these assessments and make use of big data, data analytics, so that the linkage between these assessments and teacher progress report for the students and what to be done could be sort of facilitated through artificial intelligence and data mining that would really close at least the effort gap and make these things more accessible to teachers as they work with struggling readers. Susan, you list a large number of policy recommendations, and so the trick question is, if you were to focus on 2 or 3 that you think are maybe precursor, the first stepping stone, the first step in the 1,000-mile journey, what would be the policy recommendations you would want to highlight today?
Well, there are 3 of them. There are 6 in the Business Roundtable report. No state has implemented all 6 of them, and a group of CEOs that are being led by Dr. Goodnight from SAS are committed to making sure that North Carolina is the first to get all 6 of these recommendations in place. And the first 2 really are to make sure we get a comprehensive aligned system. I think that's what has to be done before some of these other steps can be taken. So what the CEOs are urging Governor Cooper to do and the General Assembly is to create a comprehensive birth-to-8 system that is fully aligned with very clear accountability in it so that it is implemented well and we can start to see that results are being achieved. That effort's already underway. And so we are hopeful that when the recommendations are presented to the General Assembly at the end of the year, that they are vetted, modified if necessary, and then implemented. Mm-hmm. The second is closely related. Within that birth-to-8 system in North Carolina, the data is housed in different departments or agencies and is not talking to each other. So if you're going to have a comprehensive system, you need the data within that system talking to each other. So that's the second. And then the last one is that we have one of the highest quality pre-K programs in our state. It's a national model. It's known as NC Pre-K.
I want to go back to this notion of assessment and accountability. Lynne, is there a tension between large sets of assessment data that are targeted towards helping struggling readers read and accountability data or do you see these two sets of talking to each other as part of your research and part of your intervention?
Well, they're definitely related. And of course, teachers now are somewhat evaluated based on the assessments in the classroom because they need to show that their children are making progress, and that's the way in which they're accountable for the learning in the classroom. I think, though, a lot of what we might need from places like SAS is a way for teachers, and you talked, Susan, about administrators. They're really important. Principals are absolutely critical to whether our intervention works in the schools because their support. But they don't always know how to interpret the data that they get. So they get this massive amount of data that now is available through the state, through all kinds of things on the children in their schools, but they're not sure how to use that information to make a difference for individual children. And I think if you know, the businesses and schools work together to try and think about how we can make these accessible and understandable to the teachers and the principals, that would be really valuable.
Your reaction to some of these ideas, Susan?
They all make sense to me. We, SAS has always worked very closely with the UNC system and the colleges of education, and Goodnight, of course, spent 8 years on the Board of Governors for the system, and so these are fantastic ideas, and we would look forward to trying to help you as much as we can and seeing how we can implement these types of techniques so that we can strengthen third grade reading proficiency.
Thank you both, Susan and Lynn, for being with us today. The report from the Business Roundtable brings to light some pressing needs in our state and across the nation, and we thank them for this opportunity to have a discussion around how we can make a difference there. At the School of Education at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, we are really interested in partnerships between the business community, between researchers, between educators, to bring our expertise to bear on some of these very difficult problems. We do see technology as a potentially useful medium to help us link policy, accountability, good teaching and learning methodologies as we move forward in addressing this difficult problem and these gaps. So thank you so much for being with us today, and thank you for watching.